Jeffrey Deskovic is my guest. You are a prison exoneration activist, and you've got a very compelling story here. You were wrongfully convicted from a forced, coerced confession for a murder. Unfortunately, you've got a really horrible story, but it's a very important story, and you've really turned a bad situation into something positive. We'll get into that more in the later part of the interview, but now let's first of all talk about what happened. You confessed to a murder. You didn't do it. Why did you confess?
Well, I was 16 years old at the time. The police drove me to a different county. I was from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, and they drove me to town of Brewster, which is in Putnam County.
Wait. Can we get to the part though? I mean, what happened?
Yes, I'm trying to describe the totality of the circumstances. But basically, they put me in a small room. They attached me to a polygraph machine. The polygrapher himself was an undercover sheriff's investigator who was pretending to be a civilian. I didn't have an attorney present. My parents didn't know where I was. I wasn't given anything to eat. And they gave me the third degree. They played good cop, bad cop, Mutt and Jeff. The polygraphist invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking the same questions over and over again, getting more and more ferocious as each hour passed. They kept this routine up for about 7.5 hours. Towards the end of the interrogation, the polygraphist told me, he said, "Well, what do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the test that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm that." So when he said that, my fear really shot through the roof. That's when the officer was pretending to be my friend. He entered the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he was holding them off, but couldn't do so indefinitely. You have to help yourself here. And when he added if I did as they wanted, not only would they stop what they were doing, but that I could go home afterwards. Being young, naive, frightened, just 16, not thinking about the long-term implications, just being concerned with my own safety in the moment, I took the out which they offered. I made up a story based on information which they had given me in the course of the interrogation. By the police officer's own testimony, by the end of the interrogation, I was on the floor in what they described as a fetal position. I was crying uncontrollably. So that's like the circumstances. I guess the short answer to your question is just I was young, frightened, I was threatened, and they made false promises, and they kept that up for 7.5 hours.
Why were you arrested?
I was arrested based on the confession that they coerced out of me.
Excuse me, why were you detained then? Why did they come and get you?
Well, they told me that some of the students in the school told them that they might want to talk to me because I was like quiet and to myself. So then the other thing which they said attracted them to me was they claimed that I was overly upset at the victim having been murdered, but there were mental health facilities set up all throughout the town of Peekskill, which services were offered for free to help people process what had happened, keeping in mind that murders were really rare. So to me, this reason that they've cited for focusing in on me really doesn't hold water in light of other people also being upset. The third factor is that they got a psychological profile from the NYPD, and he put together what he thought the characteristics would be of the actual perpetrator, and I happened to match that profile.
So a young lady in your class, or was she in your class, or was she just in your school?
She was in high school you change classes, so she was in 2 of my classes as a freshman. She was in 1 as a sophomore. She was an immigrant from Colombia who had been in the country for a mere year and a half. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was the extent of it. We really even weren't on a high-by basis, and she was living a sheltered life in which she never went outside save being accompanied by her older sister or by her parents.
Why was gossip enough for the police to come and detain you and get you in for questioning?
I guess they were looking for leads. They're looking for suspects, and there was a lot of public pressure on the police. Like the parents were coming to the high school and actually picking their kids up right after school and bringing them straight home. So there was a lot of public pressure on the police to solve the crime, and so they were looking to arrest anybody.
Had you been in trouble in high school?
No, I never had.
Principal's office visits, arrest?
I had never been arrested for anything. Not even for a violation.
So you weren't getting in trouble with the principals or anything?
No.
It sounds like there was just gossip. Were your school peers trying to portray you as sort of a weirdo or a loner or something?
Yeah, I would agree with those words, yes.
Okay, and so that was just enough to sort of paint you as the weird guy to check out, and you're saying the police had pressure to pin the crime to somebody?
Yes.
The most skeptical response to the confession could be, why on earth would anybody confess to a murder if you didn't do it? Why?
All right, I'm glad you asked that. It is a common misconception, but again, I mean, false confession experts have found when they've studied this phenomenon that it's not as rare as we think. False, threats, false promises, misuse and abuse of the polygraph, interrogations that have taken place over a long period of time, often in combination of lack of food. I mean, it wears you down. False confessions have been the cause of wrongful convictions in 25% of the now 300 DNA-proven wrongful convictions. Particularly vulnerable populations are youth and people that have mental or emotional problems. So not only have adults falsely confessed under coercion, but also but those are the particularly vulnerable populations, of which I was one. I was a youth.
Mm-hmm. So just to be clear, you did indeed confess and say something to the effect of, I did murder her. Yes, I did it.
Yes.
Okay. What exactly did you say to the police?
I don't remember exactly word for word. I mean, just the gist of it is I admitted to it, but the thing is that the physical evidence didn't match. I mean, in my statement, I said I hit the victim over the head with a Gatorade bottle. Well, there's no, first of all, bottles at that time, we're talking, the crime happened in 1989, so Gatorade bottles were either plastic or glass, hard glass. Okay, so firstly, the type of head injuries the victim had could not be inflicted physically with a bottle. There was no shattered glass at the crime scene. There were no shards of glass found in her head, so that didn't match. The victim was also raped. That was other thing I was charged for was not just murder but rape. But they found semen inside the victim, and they did a DNA test prior to the trial, and it was found that the semen didn't match me. Okay, and also hair on the body also didn't match me. So we have a scenario in which none of the evidence matched me.
You've explained ways in which a false confession can be coerced, but for you, what is the bottom line for why you confessed?
Because I was threatened, and I was threatened, and then the false promise is what pushed me over the edge.
Well, what do you mean? What false promise?
Well, the police officer who was pretending to be my friend, he told me that if I did as they wanted, that they would stop what they were doing. The interrogation would stop, and I could go home afterwards, and that I wouldn't be arrested. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking of my own safety. And let's keep in mind that, at my age, I was just 16 at the time. And, the police officer who was making these statements to me, he was pretending to be my friend. He had won my confidence. He had won my trust. I was raised to respect the police, that they're there to protect us. They're our friend. So that was part of the scenario as well. So when he told me that, he as crazy as it sounds now as an adult, like you can go home afterwards after you confess to a murder and rape. Okay, it didn't seem that crazy when I was 16 years old, given that fact. And again, I was just looking to preserve my own safety in the moment. I was thinking about what's going to happen next. Am I going to survive this? To
preserve your own safety, why not lie?
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you lie?
No, I did.
It
was a lie. Right. I did.
You did.
I did.
I meant, why didn't you?
The wrong lie.
Why didn't you lie and say, but somebody else did it?
Then I'm incriminating somebody else falsely.
I know, but you're not thinking clearly anyway.
No, I know.
That's the bottom line.
But I want to also state, just to be clear, despite all these circumstances I've already described, despite all these factors, that I did maintain my innocence for 7.5 hours, despite everything that was happening to me.
Do you feel like you were in your right state of mind 100% too when you made the confession?
No, definitely not. I mean, I was a psychological and emotional wreck as a result of the tactics the police were engaging in.
All right, so then you confess. Then take us through, where does this go? Were you immediately detained and kept and arrested, or did you even get to go home?
No, I never got to go home. They put me in handcuffs and drove me back to the police station. When I got to the police station, they gave me pizza to eat, and I was eating periodically. Different officers were interrupting me with various aspects of the process, fingerprints, mugshots, and all that stuff. And it wasn't until they took my fingerprints, and I asked one of the officers, well, why is he doing that? And the detective, other than the detective's partner, not the one who made the false promise to me, the other one, he said to me, you're being charged with the crime. And it was only at that point that I actually realized that I was, being arrested and that I had been lied to. From there, I was taken to the county jail and went through the judicial system.
How long did it take to get the trial underway?
Somewhere between 5 to 7 months.
Did you have a public defender or a private lawyer?
Public defender. I couldn't afford to hire a private attorney.
So tell us about going to trial.
Right. Well, even though I was innocent, I lost the trial. We covered already the coerced false confession, but that was only one part of it. Then there was prosecutorial misconduct involved and fraud by the medical examiner. The two are intertwined, so I'll talk about them at the same time.
Okay.
Firstly, when an autopsy is done, there's audio and written notes which are taken contemporaneously as findings are being made. So it was only after the DNA test didn't match me, 6 months after the initial autopsy and all the paperwork was done, only in response to the DNA not matching me, that suddenly for the first time the medical examiner claimed that he found multiple heel tearings within the victim's vagina, which enabled the prosecution to argue by inference to the jury that the DNA exclusion didn't matter because the seminal fluid could have come from a consensual sexual encounter close enough to her murder and rape so as to explain away the DNA. So beyond that misconduct, the prosecution also engaged in other misconduct. For example, he argued by inference that he mentioned somebody's name by name that he claimed had this consensual sexual encounter with the victim, yet he never performed a DNA test to
Wait. You went a little fast for it. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Okay. The medical examiner's fraud enabled the prosecution to argue consensual sex.
Okay.
But he didn't just argue consensual sex, he named somebody by name that he claimed the victim had this encounter with.
Who? You mean the medical examiner?
No, the prosecutor.
The prosecutor.
He named another youth
Okay.
that he claimed had a sexual encounter with the victim.
Okay.
This was the person that he claimed was the donor of the seminal fluid found inside the victim.
So what happened to that person?
I'm getting to that now.
Okay.
Well, we know that was a lie because it didn't belong in him. The prosecutor never performed a DNA test in order to prove that assertion. He didn't even call him as a witness to give verbal testimony to that effect. He simply made the unsupported argument to the jury.
This person didn't even testify, or
No, he did not testify.
Well,
Then, when the hair on the body also didn't match, he again argued by inference, claiming that the hairs came from the medical examiner and his assistant in the course of their performing an autopsy. Now, aside from how ridiculous that would be, you would expect a professional to do all safeguards to not contaminate evidence. But even that factor aside, he never tried to prove that assertion. When the hair didn't match me, the hair expert requested the prosecution to provide exemplars from the medical examiner and his assistant so that he could do the actual comparison. But the prosecutor never caused those samples to be turned over.
At the teenage age that you were, did you have any sense of the incompetency and the fraud that was going on at that time?
Not a clue.
Okay. So then...
My defense attorney was inadequate. Because just like this, when this misconduct took place, my defense attorney, supposed to be acting as my advocate, was supposed to step in. So he was supposed to investigate this other youth as a suspect and to just generally explode the consensual sex theory by, having an investigator talk to him, seeking to have a DNA test performed, insisting that hair exemplars be provided so that comparison could be made. But he didn't do that. Just like when the medical examiner committed the fraud and gave that verbal testimony, which was really damaging because it had the effect of muting the DNA evidence, when it was time for cross-examination, he stood up in court and with a big smile, like him and the medical examiner were great friends from way back in the day, said to him, "You're going to be pleased to know that I don't have a single question for you." He never presented my alibi evidence. At the time of the crime, I was actually playing wiffle ball with a friend. He never explained to the jury the significance of DNA exclusion, nor did he use the DNA to argue that it proved that the so-called confession was coerced and false. When the judge made a statement to him off the record telling him before we had decided what type of trial we wanted, considering having a bench trial by a judge or a jury. The defense hadn't made that decision. And the judge told him off the record, pick a jury because I don't want to be responsible for acquitting your client. He never put that statement on the record. He never moved to have the judge recuse himself because of the bias and pressure he must
How do you know the judge said this?
Because my defense attorney told me that he said this.
Okay. I mean, how do you know it's not hearsay?
Well, it is hearsay in the sense that I didn't hear the judge say that myself personally, but he told me that in the course of the depositions in my civil litigation under oath. He's confirmed that statement was made to him.
Okay.
So it's not in dispute. Did you want to ask a question on that point, or do you want me to continue with the defense attorney? There's a few other things.
Continue, and I'm wondering, did you end up getting on the stand at any point?
No, I never got on the stand, and that brings me to my next point. Every time I tried to tell my attorney what had happened in the course of the police interrogation, he was always shutting me up. He never wanted to hear it. In his words, I don't care whether you were guilty or not. So he never allowed me to explain that to him, what happened. And then...
Did he say that to you?
Yes, he did.
Well, how did that... wow, that's bewildering.
And then when I wanted to testify at the pretrial hearing, at which it was going to be determined whether these statements were going to be allowed to be used against me or not, I wanted to testify so that if the judge would have ruled that they were coerced, that they were involuntary, then the prosecution would have had no case, and therefore the criminal charges against me would have been dismissed. So I wanted to take the stand, but he wouldn't allow me to. And his reasoning was that he said he hadn't decided if I was going to testify at trial or not, and he didn't want to have me on record about what happened in the interrogation prior to that potential testimony. Which really makes no sense, because if we get the statement suppressed as being involuntary, then there would have been no trial. And then when I got to trial, I wanted to testify then, only he wouldn't allow me to either. And his reasoning, he said, well, it's not my job to prove that you're innocent, it's the prosecution's job to prove that you're guilty. Which, although that might be a legal truism, in reality, it's not true. And furthermore, his second reason was that he said that his personal one-loss record was significantly better when his clients did not testify as opposed to when they did. But again, that's not a strategic reason. Maybe most of his clients had records, and therefore them taking the stand would mean that their previous records would come into evidence, which would prejudice them. But in my specific case, I had no record, so it would not have come in. So again, that reason didn't really hold any significance either.
I'm not a big fan of the justice system. I mean, it just sounds like you were being treated as not even a human, just a tool and a pawn of just a bunch of legal BS. Anyway, it pisses a person off a little bit. But so anyway.
I agree with that. I want to add, just to add to the general kangaroo court type of proceeding this was, at the sentencing hearing after I lost the trial, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict, citing my innocence and the DNA to prove that assertion. And he actually told me on the record, maybe you are innocent. But he still didn't step up for justice and overturn the conviction. He instead sentenced me to a term of imprisonment of 15 to life.
Were these, I think it's different in different regions. Were these folks elected, or were they appointed, or?
I'm really not sure of the process. I do want to point out, however, that this did not take place in a rural part of New York State. This was in Westchester County, which is maybe 40 minutes from the city.
Just sounds like a bunch of lazy people. But no, so again, you're a teenager. You can't really adequately defend yourself. You certainly don't know at that age what you know now. And after you've gone through everything you've gone through to get yourself out of this. So let's go ahead and then go forward. So you were found guilty by the jury. And wow, I mean, so you end up just going to jail as a teenager. What was your exact sentence?
My exact sentence was 15 to life, which meant that I would have to serve 15 years at a minimum to then be legally eligible to appear in front of the parole board, at which time they could decide if they wanted to exercise their discretion in releasing me. The life portion of the sentence, at 15 to life, meant that there would never come a point in time where the parole board was legally obligated to release me. And in fact, they did not release me when I appeared in front of them.
All right. So how did you get out of prison?
Sure, but I'd like to take a quick second just to walk viewers through the appellate process a little bit. I appealed my case to the appellate division. My lawyer argued my innocence three different ways: legal sufficiency, reason that they didn't prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the conviction was against the weight of the evidence. And she argued my Fifth Amendment rights. There were 6 other points of law she argued, which I'm not going to go into now. The appellate division ruled against me 5-0. In fact, saying in their opinion that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which makes no sense because all the forensics were on my behalf. My lawyer moved to re-argue the case in front of them, arguing that their conclusion was running contrary to the facts and the law, but the re-argument motion was denied. I went to the New York State Court of Appeals, New York's highest court, where the procedures you have to request permission before they'll agree to, actually allow you to fully brief and argue your issues. The Court of Appeals declined to give me permission to appeal to them, saying that there was no merit in law to justify them reviewing my case. Now I'm finished with my state appeals. So I went to federal court filing a petition for writ of habeas corpus, which is when a prisoner is arguing that his or her conviction is running contrary to the Constitution.
And who's defending you now?
A bunch of people I didn't know previously, came into my mother's life, and they all put different amounts of money so that I could hire a private attorney, because the state does not provide you with an attorney once your state appeals are over.
Oh.
So this was the one and only time that I had retained counsel, and I thought I was naive enough to think that was going to make a difference. We filed this writ for habeas corpus, again arguing my Fifth Amendment rights and arguing my innocence. Now at this time there's confusion in the court system regarding the filing procedure, because Congress had just passed a law a year before requiring all state prisoners to file in federal court 1 year after being denied by their state's highest court. And the confusion centered around how would this new law apply to cases that were already in the system. So my lawyer asked the court clerk to clarify, and the information that the court clerk told my attorney, which was that it would be sufficient if the paperwork was postmarked on the due date rather than physically being filed on the due date and in the building, was false. So my papers arrived 4 days too late. Former Westchester District Attorney and New York State Attorney General candidate, who now has her own judge show on television, Jeanine Pirro, her office took the position that those 4 days were somehow prejudicial to the people, and therefore she urged the federal court to simply rule that I was late and dismiss my case rather than them addressing it on the merits. And that's what the court did. So I was time barred. That meant I was no longer able to argue my issues directly. I had to argue that the procedural ruling against me was inaccurate.
Why did they pin that on the person and not the person trying to defend themselves and not the lawyer?
Well, I wouldn't even pin it on. I agree in part, but I'll say that I don't even really fall. It's the clerk.
Right.
The clerk. Yeah, I agree with you. It's really inconsistent with justice. Now, I appealed that ruling to the United States Court of Appeals. Again, like the State Court of Appeals, you have to ask for permission. So I was given permission, and my lawyer advanced the following arguments. Now, at this point, I had changed lawyers. The paid lawyer left, and this other attorney got herself assigned to my case. She advanced the following arguments: that this was not a delay caused either by myself or my attorney, but by the court clerk, that upholding a ruling such as this would be to cause a miscarriage of justice to continue, and that overturning the procedural ruling would open the door to more sophisticated DNA testing. Now, one of the two judges that were hearing these arguments included future United States Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Once again, the district attorney opposed, and once again, the court sided with the district attorney. My lawyer moved to re-argue the case in front of them, requesting that all the judges hear it. But this was denied. And then the United States Supreme Court declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So that marked the end of all of my legal appeals and the end of legal representation.
Can I just make clear you're talking?
Sure.
Did you get to defend that in court, or you were just fighting to even be heard by court? You lost me a little bit there.
What, with the United States Supreme Court?
With the federal court with Sotomayor.
Yeah.
You did get to, lawyer
yes.
did get to make the case.
My lawyer was allowed to argue against that procedural ruling in front of them. They gave her permission to do that. It's just that the arguments fell on deaf ears, and basically they said in so many words that the lower court ruling that I was 4 days late, that ruling would be upheld.
4 days late to be heard. I'm still confused. I mean, if you had not been 4 days late, did that mean you would have gotten a trial in front of those judges?
If I had not been 4 days late, that meant that the judge would have been forced to rule on my Fifth Amendment issue, would have been forced to rule on my innocence claim based on the DNA exclusion.
Okay. Because what I'm hearing, if I'm processing, bear with me, you are talking about a lot of legal mumbo jumbo that I don't understand.
Right.
What I'm hearing you say is you were basically fighting to be heard,
yes,
more than you were fighting to have the evidence heard.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the legal consequence of the court ruling that I was late, is I lost the right to argue my case directly. I was relegated to simply arguing that this procedural time barring of me was unjustified.
Has anything ever been done to correct that from ever happening again to anybody?
No, it hasn't. And in fact, I tried. I was in contact with the Senate Judiciary Committee, both the Republicans and the Democrats, when Justice Sotomayor was in the confirmation process. I sent them my paperwork, and I was requesting to be allowed to testify at the confirmation hearing and to have that whole proceduralism versus substantive justice be weighed, and to even have a larger discussion on the prevalent problem of wrongful convictions in this country, both on a state and federal level. But the Democrats were not willing to let me testify because they didn't want to go against a nominee nominated by their own party, and the Republicans didn't want to raise the wrongful conviction issue either. Unfortunately, traditionally, at least on the state level, in my advocacy work there, it's normally that party that's the obstacle to getting wrongful conviction prevention measures passed. So they weren't willing to adopt the issue, even just for purposes of going against her.
So you mean the two-party system put politics ahead of people? Wow.
Yeah,
I say that
there,
sarcastically.
right? Of course.
So you didn't basically even get to the Supreme Court. They didn't want to hear anything about you.
Yes.
So then what's that? That's the end of the road for you? And where are you in age by this point?
By this point, it's 2001. So doing some quick math, I was 17 by the time I lost the trial. That was in 91. So 2001, that's about 10 years.
Okay.
So I'm 27 years old at this point.
Well, so you've lost your childhood. You've lost your growing up years.
Yes.
Oh.
So now at this point, I have to try to get a lawyer for free. I have to try to get an investigator for free.
Well, for what? I'm confused.
I will tell you. Because the only way the court would be willing to hear from me was if I find some kind of new evidence.
Okay. So
find some new facts that would open up the door for a previously unavailable legal argument.
And what court? What court would hear you?
The trial court would hear me.
Okay. So you have a little window of an out. All right. So
kind of, sort of, maybe if I can find professionals to help me for free, and if they can somehow, find something that was previously unknown.
Okay.
So since I have no money to hire one, that's why I have to try to find people who work for free. So I begin this massive letter writing campaign for about 4 years. Or I wrote countless letters, often never hearing back from anybody. And eventually I had a chance encounter in the mail with an investigator. I was actually writing a book author in care of the publishing company. And someone at the publishing company, rather than forward it to the author, sent it to an investigator who wrote me back right away. That was Claudia Whitman. And she gave me ideas, and she attempted to get places to take my case. One of the ideas she hit upon was a winner, which was Right the Innocence Project Again, which is a not-for-profit organization in Manhattan that works to clear wrongfully convicted prisoners across the country in those instances in which DNA testing can demonstrate innocence and in which no prior testing was available. I say again, I originally wrote them in 92, 93. But the problem was that I didn't fit their case selection criteria because I had a pre-existing DNA exclusion. What changed was that the DNA databank came online, and so that would be the new angle. So she lobbied the organization for about 6 months, just like an employee within the organization lobbied the decision makers to take my case, because they didn't want to go forward with it because they weren't sure that they could win, because there was already this pre-existing exclusion. But 6 months later, they did agree to take my case, and they took the DNA, which already didn't match, and ran it through the data bank, and it matched the real perpetrator, whose DNA was present because left free while I did time for his crime. He struck killing a school teacher, who was the mother of two. So once that matched him, the authorities questioned him. He admitted he was the person who did the crime. He also admitted it to a reporter on video camera. He was arrested, pled guilty, and was sentenced for the.
So all of the lazy, competent, and prejudicial type of stuff that happened in the courts, and then of course the two-party system playing politics, you result in somebody who was the guilty party getting and then being on the streets to do this.
Yes, I would also say that I one of the failings in my case and in many other cases is that the appellate process is inadequate, because too often these courts are not giving, decisions that are objectively considered. It's just a rubber stamp denial process in which their knee-jerk reaction is to find a way, anyway, to preserve a conviction no matter what.
Right.
And then also, I don't consider what happened to me to be a good faith error, because the bottom drops out of that argument when you consider that once the DNA test didn't match me, they were supposed to drop the case at that point.
Well, I remember you had said too about the bottle thing, that when you were being coerced by the interrogator to get a confession out of you, you had said something about a Gatorade bottle, right?
Yes.
And you said that wasn't consistent with the injury. Did that ever come out of court?
Well, the crime scene details were testified at court, so it came out in that sense. But my lawyer didn't heighten or sharpen the issue like he was supposed to, so that was another failing on his part.
So then, does basically the turning point now to get you out? You get in touch with this organization, and sorry, what was their name again?
The Innocence Project.
The Innocence Project. So take us through how the Innocence Project helps you get innocent.
Right. Well, they agreed to take my case after about 6 months of internal and a little bit of external debate. Once they commit to taking the case, they obtain the cooperation of the district attorney. See, by this point, Ms. Pirro had left office and was replaced by her successor, who had only been in office for about 40 days. And she agreed to allow me to have the further testing. And once the testing matched the actual perpetrator, the DA joined the defense motion to overturn the conviction, and then later on she joined the motion to dismiss the case on grounds of actual innocence.
So to be clear, you're talking about now where this is dismissed.
Yes.
Is that it? So victory, you're emancipated,
Yes.
What's the word? Incarceration?
I was exonerated.
I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the word there. Exonerated, yes. You had two big strikeouts of fortune there, which would be the Innocence Project coming into your life, and then also the DNA database becoming available.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Well, I wouldn't say strikeouts. That was when the odds came in my favor. I caught lightning in a bottle twice.
Right. All right. So let me ask you a couple quick questions, just a yes or no. Do you wish that Sonia Miter had, butchering her name, Sotomayor? Do you wish that she had not gotten approved as the Supreme Court justice?
Yes.
Do you have resentment, anger, hatred towards all of these parties that have been involved, the judges, the lawyers, all of them?
No, I dislike what they did. It ruined much of my life, although I'm doing a lot of positive things now, which we'll get into later. That said, I realized I made a decision very early on in my freedom that I wasn't going to be angry or bitter, because if I was, then ultimately they would win in the end, and I would be the bigger loser than them.
Did you ever get to have any face-to-face time to sort of have a confrontation, just to have a peace of mind telling off, or whether it was a angry telling off or a polite I just want you to know, tailing off with any of them in the future?
No, I would like to do that in the future. The closest I've come so far is being in the same room with the prosecutor and the detectives involved and the lieutenant. Who, by the way, I want to say that this lieutenant at the time, Lieutenant Tumalo, he's now the chief of police in Peekskill. He's still there and holding that post. I haven't been able to confront them or speak my mind, however you want to phrase it, because I'm suing them. And the part of the etiquette of that is that the parties aren't supposed to directly talk to each other. So the closest I've come as being in the same room with them during depositions in which my lawyer is questioning them about their actions.
Can you clarify what exactly you're suing them for?
Sure. I'm suing them for a federal civil rights violation. I'm suing them because they coerced a false confession against me. They fabricated other evidence insofar as that they not only coerced a false confession, but then they attributed statements to me that I never made. And then I sued the medical examiner for the fraud he committed, and I sued my public defender for malpractice.
What's your estimate of when that will be ruled on?
Well, I've settled with some of the parties already. I mean, I under New York state law, you're able to sue for compensation in state court also, which I've done. So I settled that one. I settled against the county, and the county involved suing my lawsuit against the district attorney's office as a whole, along with the medical examiner. So I settled that, and I settled with Legal Aid Society. I'm still in litigation with the city of Peekskill for the actions of the police department, and then Putnam County, which is the municipality which provided the polygrapher. So I'm still in litigation with them. The trial is probably about a year away.
Would you like them all to basically be fired out of their professions?
Yes, I think that they should.
Okay.
I mean, to leave them in place would be to set the stage for them to continue. The police chief is still the chief. He's still there. The other police officers are retired, but they're receiving pensions. I don't think that they should, considering what happened to me. The polygrapher he's working in the medical field, like he's this healer.
The cases that you get to take that aren't settled, could they be appealed once it's ruled on, it's ruled on?
No,
that type of case.
The losing party would have a right to appeal.
I just asked because you could potentially still be in court for what? Another long? Decade or so?
Yeah, it's possible, but that's part of the frustrating thing. I mean, my criminal trial took place between 6 to 8 months later, and there my life, my freedom, my future is on the line. And that could be done in 6 to 8 months, right? That's enough prep time. Mm-hmm. Yet, in a civil situation, where now I'm trying to get vindication, and it's simply money on the line, right? Then we have to have this long, drawn out, slow process in which, we've been at it for 6 years already now. And still another year away from a trial and possibly an appeals process. So it's frustrating, this inconsistent dichotomy within the justice system.
I want to ask you, as much as you're comfortable sharing, to summarize the personal experience of having gone through this. I could imagine that if you're a teenager, just regular old teenager living your life, being a teenager, and then all of a sudden you are arrested and taken into prison with, presumably, were you with adults or were you with
No, I was with kids? Adults. I was with adults.
So you're in prison with adults. Your life has changed. No more, hey, I'm a carefree kid going to school and doing whatever you're doing as a teenager at that time. Now you're in prison with adults. And then you miss out on growing up years. People are learning how to drive, getting ready for the prom, getting ready to graduate, have the rest of their lives. Talk about that experience. Was it psychologically damaging to you to go through all of that?
Absolutely, sure. Of course, most people who've been wrongfully convicted are afflicted with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm no exception to that. I've had to overcome anxiety attacks, panic attacks, being overwhelmed easily by a sheer magnitude of choices. I've had to learn technology. I've had to try to repair relations with my extended family members. That's an awkward experience, knowing when I'm in their presence, knowing who they are intellectually and having memories, but not having that connection because of the long periods of time. You know, I was supposed to have my education completed at a normal age, but started a career, been working towards financial freedom. I mean, you mentioned a few things. I mean, I missed deaths, I missed births, I missed the prom. I've lost connection with my friends, so it's been difficult trying to break in socially. There's a stigma of, just in terms of the dating aspect of things. Just briefly, I mean, my background has been a factor in the past. I struggled mightily to be able to obtain gainful employment. I was never able to do that because, although my innocence was never in question due to the actual perpetrator being apprehended, still I didn't have the same level of job experience as other applicants, so I was passed over. So there was that aspect of it as well.
By the way, just a curious thing for me, when you apply for a job, even if you've been exonerated, you still have to put "I've been convicted" on an application?
No. I'm allowed to say no, because from the legal system's point of view, since I was exonerated, my record was clean because of that. It's as if it never happened, as if the conviction never happened.
Did your family stand by you through all this? Did they ever have any doubt about your innocence, or did they believe in you and stand by you all the way through?
Well, my extended family believed in me, with the exception of two people. That having been said, though, my mother was the only person who consistently came to visit me. I mean, there were a few sets of people who sporadically visited me, and then I wouldn't see them for 2-3 years, and then I'd see them, and then they'd disappear for another 2-3 years. Their belief in me didn't translate into them assisting me, though, in obtaining legal representation and investigator to try to clear my name.
Your time in prison, were you a loner, or did you sort of develop friendships and have a network of friends or support there in prison?
I developed a network of people that I socialized with. My belief in God was a key factor in my making it through my experience, both psychologically and not committing suicide, and it provided me with a set of people with which I could socialize with, albeit at arm's length. So that was a factor, and there was another person who was there who we kept each other going for about 13 years. I mean, Frank Sterling was his name, and I believed in his innocence. He believed in mine. We had similar cases, so we would get together every 6 weeks and encourage each other to keep going, and we would try to strategize about and brainstorm like what was the next move. I was cleared before he was. I spoke about his case a number of times after I was released, including at my own press conferences following my release. I wrote about his case in my capacity as a columnist. He was cleared about a year and a half ago, also through DNA evidence.
While you were in prison, did you get access to educating yourself in any kind of way? Sometimes when you hear hard-ass people talk about people in jail and prison, they like to say things like, oh, they all have internet access and TV and all this kind of stuff. Was it luxurious and comfortable for you in any way? And also, did you at least have access to, I believe sometimes there's access to at least education programs for people to get a GED or something to that effect who are incarcerated. So was any of that available to you? And was it cozy in any way, or was it all pretty much just enduring hell until you can get out of it?
It was not luxurious in any way. It was a living hell, and featuring the guards, the civilians, and the other prisoners all as obstacles to the ultimate goal, which is focusing on trying to prove your name and regaining your freedom. There was a lot of violence in the air. There was a lot of gang activity. There was 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings every day. There was plenty of violence that didn't involve weapons. You always had to be alert. Adrenaline was always running through my body. There was no internet access. They don't allow the prisoners to have that. I obtained a GED. I got an associate's towards liberal arts, and I completed an additional year of schooling towards the bachelor's degree. But then that silver lining was taken from me because in 1995, New York elected George Pataki as governor, and he decided it'd be a good idea to cut funding of college education for prisoners, so then that was taken from me. I completed a lot of the vocational shops there, but although I amassed many certificates, they largely were really all irrelevant because the material in the shops was obsolete about 5 years prior to my stepping foot in there. I did read a lot of nonfiction books, reading a lot of presidential history, politics, self-help, and relationship books. So I educated myself that way informally.
And how did you get access to learning about the Freedom Project? And you said you were writing people to help you
The
all
Innocence
along.
Project.
But how did you find out about them? Was it sort of word of mouth from the legal help that you had, and they were telling you about these resources? Was it the prisoners inside there this was common knowledge, or they were? How exactly did you know what to look for to get yourself the help that you needed to get eventually?
Combination of things. First, some of the information was common knowledge amongst the prisoners. Other things I discovered when going to the law library. I originated a lot of my own unorthodox ideas about different people, places, and organizations, that could potentially help me, not simply directly, but indirectly. I subscribed to two different wrongful conviction oriented magazines, one of which was called Justice Denied, which is the nation's only wrongful conviction prevention oriented magazine, and then there was another less formal publication called Innocence Denied. So I subscribed to both of those, and I got some ideas.
Did you have to pay for it?
Yeah, I did, but I sacrificed. Sometimes I went without. Look, the food in prison was very bad. Okay, so it was often burned, not cooked fully. Portion size was a problem. They paid us maybe like pay rates of 22, 25, 28, 32, 42 cents an hour, which amounted.
What kind of work were you doing?
Oh, no, they paid me for educational and vocational training.
Okay.
But then aside from those things, I also worked as a teacher's aide for a year and a half, helping people work towards a GED. But I would take that money and sometimes the funds that my mother would send me, and I wouldn't always buy stuff to eat. Sometimes I would sacrifice and just subject myself to the burned, undercooked, and insufficient portion of food in order to spend money on things towards trying to regain my freedom. So I sacrificed and paid for those subscriptions, just like I sacrificed and paid to buy writing utensils, pads, postage. It wasn't cheap to send those letters out. I would any type of scrap of newspaper, anything on any kind of wrongful conviction material. I used to collect it, and sometimes even just generating new ideas was a problem. And then to try to obtain, the addresses couldn't be taken for granted.
It sounds like you were absolutely preoccupied with emancipating yourself and getting out of there. Is that
Absolutely.
it? Was that pretty much your brain 24/7? Can you
Pretty
clarify?
close to it.
Was
Pretty
it
close to it.
16 hours? 16 years total, right?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
when you speak about it, to summarize it, 16 years is the figure.
In prison.
In prison. If we want to be like technical or, completely accurate down to the minutia, it's 15 years, 8 months, 15 years, 9 months between there. That was my primary thing. But what I would do is, you can only read so much and write so much each day before your brain becomes fried. And it was at that point that when I experienced that need to take a break for that day, that's when I would crack open the nonfiction books and read that and other things that I used to throw myself into. I used to play chess. I would watch sports. I would play sports. I would engage in various forms of self-delusion. I remember in 1998, they allowed us to have televisions in the prison cell. And so when that happened, although my TV stayed off most of the time for obvious reasons, there were certain programs I watched every week. But to me, I wasn't just watching a program. I was visiting friends. I wasn't going to my prison assignment. I was going to school. I was going to work when I was working in food service. But you pretend that it's natural to have to pay an exorbitant fee on a collect call, or that it's normal to be strip searched following a visit. So you do these different delusions. I would cut out pictures sometimes of nature scenes and paste them on a wall and mentally travel there. So you find delusions and other things to throw yourself into to try to escape your reality a little bit.
What was day one of freedom like for you? Just kind of give us a summary of day one for you.
Well, I stepped out of the courtroom, and it was a beautiful, clear blue sky. The sun was out. I felt the fresh air, and I was serenaded in applause from members of my extended family, the legal group that got me out. Then we had a press conference immediately. There was a lot of media there. I waited for my lawyers to speak, and then it was my turn to step to the microphone. Everything I had ever wanted to say for 16 years but could never get out, it all started flowing to my mind, one subject after another, and so I stood there for about 2.5 hours. From there, we had a nice luncheon. I had my favorite food. I had mussels with fried diavolo sauce. I had some baked ziti. I had Neapolitan ice cream. I took a town car after that was provided to go back to my aunt's house. I wish I could say I had this really wild, raucous party that was celebrated to the crack of dawn, but that wasn't what happened. In reality, when I got to my aunt's house, there were a few people sitting around the table. My mother, my aunt, and a few other extended family members. But I felt out of place. This wasn't my environment. I didn't belong out. I really couldn't relate to the people around the table. And so I exited the house. I went to the yard, and I just sat there by myself for a couple of hours, doing something I had dreamed of doing for a long time, which was just be allowed to sit outside in the nighttime without being forced to go back inside. And I took a bath, which I hadn't done in like 16 years, and I went to sleep. That was it.
And this was 2006?
This was September 2006.
At what point, or have there been a point yet in which you felt normal, or at least at peace enough where you're not having to deal with all that trauma, being around stabbings and all this kind of stuff? I guess I'm trying to get at, have you reached a point of normalcy or peace as much as it can be, having gone through this traumatic experience since then?
I would say yes. I mean, I feel that way now. I think that, the passage of time has, my head's become clearer. I'm more used to being out here. I've learned the technology to a large degree. I've received some financial compensation, so I don't have the additional obstacle of not knowing if I'm going to be able to, pay my rent or eat next month. So that's something that's relieved from me. I've worked with mental health experts in dealing with a lot of the psychological consequences to what happened to me. So those are a lot better now. It would not be correct to say that I don't have any residual impact of those things. That and that the social difficulties don't still exist, because they do. Nobody walks away from a wrongful conviction unscarred.
After having gone through all this trauma, you took a path that has basically, I would call you an activist or an advocate. Would you be comfortable with those labels?
I would be comfortable
all
with
right,
both of those labels.
So let's go ahead and tell us the origins of this path. After you get out of this, you could have just said, okay, no more. You could have walked away. You could have edged out. You could have just hid, but instead you were covered, I think, by the New York Times, right?
I was.
They did a pretty extensive article by you, Democracy Now! So you didn't just shy away and just try to put this past behind you. You basically embraced it. So take us to that path.
Sure. I got a scholarship from Mercy College to complete my education, so I got a bachelor's degree. I'm on the verge of receiving a master's degree in criminal justice from John Jay. So I continued on with my formal education. The reason why I got involved in being, an individual advocate activist is that I can't forget about the men and women who I metaphorically left behind. One of the things that used to frustrate me when I would read articles about other people being exonerated, they would get this initial hit of publicity, and then it would die off. Nobody ever tried to parlay that, try to continue that, keep that going in order for purposes of shedding light on the problem of wrongful convictions, that there are more people who are still in prison. And when I suddenly found myself unexpectedly free, I kind of drafted myself, and I said, I said to myself, you used to criticize people before. Now it's your turn. You're free. Let's show them how it's done. So I became an advocate. There's different ways in which I actualize that. I mean, I've given about 80 presentations across the country, universities, colleges, high schools, professional organizations on the topic of wrongful convictions. I became a columnist for 5 years for a weekly newspaper called the Westchester Guardian, where I wrote primarily on wrongful conviction issues, but also covered other subjects of capital punishment and other related criminal justice issues, to where my formal and informal education would make it interesting. I decided I would sacrifice privacy in exchange for greater awareness of these issues, with the hope that that could lead to legislation just aimed at preventing this. So I did a lot of television, print, media, and radio interviews.
I got to stop you and just say, where did that come from, though, when you, you referenced having a faith that got you through to keep persevering during the severity of the hardship of what you've gone through. I mean, and I don't ask this question just to you, Jeffrey. I sort of ask this question to every person who's either a volunteer or an advocate or an activist, because I don't think we're the majority. I think I would say the majority of Americans, I think, unfortunately, sort of sit back and aren't politically engaged or aren't civically engaged or aren't advocates or activists. So what is in you, as much as you can describe it, that causes you to have done this instead of saying, I'm just going to go back to normal life? Or, well, not back to normal life,
right.
excuse me, to try to pursue. You never had a normal life.
Right. But I know what you mean. Why didn't I just walk away from all of this and just like disappear into the sunset?
And what's in you to really drive you to this?
Well, a few things. I mean, I want to make a difference. I think that this does. I want to make what happened to me count for something, so I can find some kind of silver lining in this. And, I believe in God, and I think that it's my calling to be an advocate on behalf of, fighting against wrongful convictions. So other ways in which I've actualized beyond I mentioned lecturing, writing, doing multimedia interviews. I also, lobbied a lot of elected officials in New York and Connecticut. I've testified at legislative hearings in which wrongful conviction prevention measures were considered. I worked in conjunction with New Yorkers Against the Death Penalty in New York in 2007 as part of our successful effort at preventing capital punishment reinstatement because of the obvious risk that it poses to executing innocent people. And I was part of the successful campaign in Connecticut, in which the death penalty was legislatively repealed. So I did those things as an individual. When I came into possession of having some financial compensation, I decided that I wanted to take my advocacy to the next level. I wanted to create a legacy. I didn't want to be forgotten by time. It's not that I myself am important, but that what happened to me is important because it continues to happen to other people, and I don't want the world to forget, lest history be repeated. So I wanted to take it to the next level, and have like a support staff, and also have an exonerative component, which I could never do on my own, and have a reintegrative one. So I decided to commit $1.5 million to the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice.
Of your own money?
Of my own money.
Wow.
So we have an office on 72nd Street in Manhattan. We have a website, the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice.org. We have a 4-pronged mission. We want to raise awareness, we seek legislative changes to prevent wrongful convictions. We seek to clear those who already have been wrongfully convicted, not simply in DNA cases, as the organization that won my freedom, the Innocence Project, limits themselves to, as do most organizations in the field, but also in non-DNA cases. I mean, to me, I can't make a distinction between one person's innocence and another simply because of whether biological evidence exists or not. And then we have the reintegrative component, which we try to help people put their lives back together again. As part of that 4th prong, if people came to us for assistance that were on parole and wanted assistance in transitioning to a crime-free life, of course we would not turn them away. So those are our four prongs. We have an assistant director who has a law degree, is a former probation officer and an investigator from Putnam County Legal Aid, who's also founded a newspaper I used to write for and wrote a book called The Janine Machine, the only book in print to date that was critical of Janine Pirro. We have an investigator who's a retired NYPD detective. We have an attorney. We have an office manager. Those are the paid staff. We have about 5 interns that work for us. So basically, with my funds, I've guaranteed us to have 3 years of operation, in which time we need to make this organization sustainable through external funds. It kind of becomes, when you're talking about getting donations from both large and small donors, getting non-governmental grants, getting governmental grants, it almost becomes like a cart of the horse scenario, in the sense that you need funds to get started, yet donors of whatever the type that I mentioned, they want to have confidence that your organization can actually do what you're purporting to do, which they would be funding. So you almost have to have a staff. You almost have to have a headquarters, so to speak. So, I believe in the mission. I believe that we will become sustainable, but it's not a given. I mean, we don't as yet. We have 0 large donors. We don't have any celebrity spokespeople. We don't have wealthy people and people of influence as board members who typically help organizations become sustainable.
As much of a nobody as I am, I endorse you and I support you. And it's also so commendable that you've spent so much effort and so much out of pocket. You could have took that money and gone and played or invested in some other sort of easier going business pursuit, but you're really trying to make a difference for other people. And I can't commend you enough for that. Can you clarify what is your own personal goal regarding your own career, because you talked about pursuing higher education. So where are you trying to go with that?
Once I receive the master's degree, which I'm on the verge of getting now, I'm contemplating going to law school next. So that is a possibility.
That's what I thought you were going to say, and
no, that is a possibility. But I mean, the trick is though. I mean, that's time consuming, that's demanding, and it's not like I don't have anything else to do. Right. I've started this organization. I've made a serious financial commitment, and so before I can do that, I need to make the organization sustainable. I need to secure its future, and then I can go to law school myself. At some point, I may decide that I, have a political future. I mean, we'll see. I mean, certainly it would bring a lot of attention to the cause of wrongful convictions, and I'm about making a difference. And I don't. To me, the story, the media, it's just it's a tool. It's a tool that can be used to make positive changes. So I'm really comfortable doing interviews and things like that. So it would seem to me to be a natural. Progression.
When you described your process of trying to appeal, I heard you basically say people were playing politics with this issue a lot. You feel like any progress has been made to make Democrats or Republicans or just anybody in the political, legal, judicial world more sympathetic, empathetic, concerning, aware of the problems regarding this topic of wrongful convictions?
I think that there's some progress being made. I mean, every time a new person's been exonerated, it brings a new level of awareness. We're up to 300 people now that have been proven innocent across the country through DNA alone, which is not counting like triple that amount when it comes to non-DNA exoneration. So each time that happens, there's a level of awareness. I mean, certainly, when I go out and do presentations, that's another, and do multimedia interviews, that's another wave of it. I mean, lobbying, the same thing. So there is this reaching of people, there is reaching of professionals, there is reaching of politicians. At the same time, what's frustrating is that we still don't have any legislative changes. We don't have them in New York. We don't have them across the country in the federal system. We don't have them in the other states. Frequently, when reforms are passed, it's just rather than covering the gamut of of established gaps that innocent people can fall in. You get maybe one thing passed and another, nine are just not passed. And then sometimes the one is, done in a way that's inadequate. I mean, for example, Illinois, now you have to record, but only in certain types of felony cases. So that means you can still be wrongfully convicted based on a coerced false confession in cases that don't have the recording mandatory. So often the measures are not adequate either. So that part is frustrating. I mean,
And what would you say is the biggest hindrance to that progress? Is it lack of empathy? Is it prejudice towards people who just get arrested, and there's just a prejudice that comes with getting arrested, whether you're guilty or not?
It's a variety of reasons. I think that there's still a big presumption that everyone who's arrested and convicted is guilty. The adage, well, obviously, if you didn't do it, they wouldn't have arrested you for it. I think that's some of it. I think also that there's the tension in the criminal justice system itself between finality of conviction versus justice. I think that's a problem. Putting proceduralism over substantive justice is still a mindset that's hard, that you're fighting against. I think that when we have politicians who get elected and run on these tough on crime planks, they tend to equate procedural safeguards such as videotaping interrogations, better line of procedures, better system of defense for the poor, criminalizing prosecutorial misconduct, standardized evidence preservation system. I can keep going, but I'll stop. The point I'm trying to make, Jeff, just give me just 1 second, is that these measures, which are really just about making the system more accurate, let's get the right people, let's get them off the street, let's not convict innocent people. All right, these procedures are equated to being soft on crime.
But there's so much politics
being
behind all
anti-law
of this.
enforcement, but it's not anti-law enforcement. It's about making it more accurate to help law enforcement get it right. Each time the wrong person is convicted, the actual perpetrator is free to strike again. So really, I see this as a public safety issue also.
Amen, but just the stupidness of politics, is not just this topic. We could talk about war, for example. They all got to sell themselves as hard ass on, justice and crime and everything like that. I want to ask you 3 quick questions. These I know we could go in depth about, but we don't have the time. So just your quickest kind of one or a couple word answers on these 3 topics personally. Do you support the fact that people in prison should have access to furthering their education while in prison?
Absolutely. College education is a serious crime deterrent. The recidivism rate is much lower for prisoners who've gotten a college education as opposed to those who haven't. If we release people who've committed crimes with no education and little way of obtaining gainful employment, guess what they're going to resort to in order to make ends meet?
Okay. Then quick answer for the DNA database in light of concerns that privacy advocates have for that type of database.
I'm in favor of expanding the DNA database for all felonies and all misdemeanor convictions. I draw the line at conviction. I'm opposed to entering DNA into the database simply upon arrest or for violations. I think that people who start off with small crimes sometimes, though not always, graduate to larger crimes. Marijuana is a gateway drug, which leads to larger drugs, which often translates into violent crime.
Would you take out the DNA for anybody exonerated?
Absolutely, I would remove DNA samples from the database of anyone who's been exonerated.
Okay, and then the last of the 3 questions of the quick response for is by the time this interview is up on the internet, the election will have already happened. But here in California, we will have voted on the death penalty to stop it or continue it. And what do you hope that California voters will have voted on?
I will hope that they will have voted to repeal the death penalty for a variety of reasons really quickly. First, it risks the execution of innocent people. I've spoken to a lot of murder victim family members, and the heightened publicity around death penalty cases makes them relive the crime every time an appeal happens. It's a tremendous wastage of public resources. In New York, for example, from 1995 to 2004, we spent $200 million. Nobody was executed. That the money could have better went for social programs and crime prevention. There's also racism within the death penalty A person who's a minority who's been convicted of killing someone who's white is more likely to receive death penalty than one who's not. It's too arbitrary. It depends on like what geography the crime happens in, what the personal politics of the local DA is, what they're, in terms of their position on the death penalty or not, and whether or not they're seeking to advance their political career by means of seeking the death penalty. So for all of those reasons, along with lastly morally, I think killing those who kill, in order to show that killing is wrong, simply doesn't make sense to me. So for all of those reasons, I think that, I hope that the citizens of California will vote to repeal the death penalty.
All right, so now let's talk about where you'd like to go with the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. Where would you like to go? What kind of support, help do you want from the public? Tell us about that.
Sure, we would like to get large donors. We would like to get small donors. Say whatever you will about President Obama. He raised $100 million with largely on donations. This is last election cycle, not the current one, with donations between $10 to $100. So if we all do a little bit, we can get a lot done. I would hope that we could obtain some celebrity spokespeople. We need to build a board of people of means and influence who can bring similar people to the endeavor. So I hope to make it, first of all, I want to make the organization sustainable. I would like to get, not only continue our existence, but I would like to be able to expand the program. I'd like to add more professionals. We currently have 20 active cases, another 400 that are awaiting preliminary review. We're averaging 30 requests for assistance every 2 weeks. So if we increase the staff, we could work on more cases effectively, and we could expand the scope. Right now we do DNA cases nationwide. We do non-DNA cases in Connecticut, New York, and New Jersey. I'd like to be able to expand. And then lastly, I'd like to eventually, maybe I'm really dreaming, but lastly, I would like us to have an endowment which guaranteed us that no matter how much money we raise in any given fiscal year, we know that we would have X amount of money to continue to program each year. Ultimately, with that goal in mind, I'd love the foundation to outlive me, because even if we pass all the reforms in the world, we'll make the system a lot more accurate. It's run by human beings. And so even in the best of intentions and the best of circumstances, mistakes are made, which is not to say that everybody is always working with the best of intentions and that things don't happen often intentionally. So there'll always be a need for an organization such as the one I've started. So that's why I would like the organization to just be a perpetual, ongoing thing.
I wish you so much luck and success with that. Please keep us updated. I do want to ask you, though, one hard question, which I think is a fair question.
Go ahead.
How do you ensure that you're not being exploited by getting approached by somebody who is truly guilty? How do you sort of distinguish the guilty from the non-guilty?
I think that's a really great question. Firstly, we have a questionnaire that we've developed. We've started with a questionnaire that another organization in the field used, and we tinkered with. We removed certain items, added certain. So between that and getting certain legal documents, we get appellate briefs, we get police reports, we get expert testimony. So that enables us to wrap our head, and we cross-reference the legal documents with what we've been told on the questionnaire to make sure we haven't been given a snow job. That enables us to wrap our head around the case without pouring through several thousand documents per case. Then, while we're wrap our heads around the case, we ask ourselves two important questions. Number one, does this applicant, at the very minimum, have at least a colorable claim of innocence based on something that's objective? Number two, is there a path going forward that we see that could theoretically lead us to uncovering previously unknown information, which could enable us to make a argument of innocence in court? If the answer to either of those questions is no, then we can't help that case and we have to move on. Now, is it possible that despite those two questions, despite that process, that we could make a mistake and work on someone's case who's guilty? Of course it's possible. I don't think it's likely. We all have a working knowledge of the cause of wrongful conviction. So if we see the red flags that are known about police interrogations, about informants, about identifications that are, so there's significant height and weight discrepancies, we know what we're looking for. So we're making a really great educational guess. It's not foolproof. Of course, we have, but if we ever change our opinion, if we think that the person's guilty or the applicant has been dishonest to us in any aspect, yeah, then we automatically drop the case and we move on to the next one. One of the frequent questions that I'm asked is, why start your own organization? Why not just like join the Innocence Project, for example, or join some other similar mission organization?
I wanted to ask, but I was a little.
No,
I was afraid I was going to be impolite. So
No,
because
not
it is one of my questions that
Of
I sort of
course.
always think about any nonprofit or any kind of endeavor. Why don't you always join with the existing people? I guess the most obvious question would be, especially if they freed you, why wouldn't you
Right.
join their deal instead of starting your own?
Sure.
You
of
brought it
course.
up, so okay.
It's fair game.
All right.
It's fair game. I brought it up.
Okay.
Okay. The answer is that, number one, they only take DNA cases.
Right, okay.
And we go beyond DNA and non-DNA. They don't have the reintegrative program that we that as one of our prongs we have. And another reason, those are the main reasons, but a few other reasons is that certain wrongful conviction prevention legislative measures that we advocate for, they're silent on. So that's another thing. I mean, to give a clear-cut example, we're in favor of criminalizing clear-cut intentional prosecutorial misconduct. If you withhold exculpatory evidence, if you suborn perjury, if you don't correct perjured testimony, if you work hand in glove with experts, tell me what you want to prove and I'll prove it, rather than allowing the experts to be objective, then to me, they've in effect pulled off a kidnapping using the legal system under color of law. So that should have an incarcerative penalty. They're silent on that issue. So that's one example there. Another thing is that there's plenty of cases to go around. There's not enough organizations to deal with them. There's, last time I checked, I think that there's, well, this was a little while ago, but there were 2.3 million people enmeshed in the criminal justice system one way or another. So if we're conservative and we say, let's say 5% are innocent, let's say 2% are innocent, you're talking about a staggering number of people. Any one organization can only deal with a certain amount of cases. So there's plenty of cases to go around as well. Not enough places for people to turn to for assistance.
So I want to close then by asking you about if somebody has a family member in need of help and they believe that their loved one is wrongfully convicted, or God forbid somebody watching this, if I wind up in jail, I'm calling you, Jeffrey. So what would you advise? Call you? What?
Okay, you could write us snail mail. The address is the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, 133 West 72nd Street,
West 72nd?
New York, 10023.
Okay.
They can write us and just ask us to send them a questionnaire, and the questionnaire would be where they would explain about their case as opposed to in that initial letter. Aside from that, their family member, their loved one can visit our website. They can download our questionnaire and mail it to the prisoner themselves.
Okay. I mean, for the general public, you're online. Okay, you're talking about people in prison. Okay.
Right. But people in prison have friends, family members, and advocates.
Okay. So we will put all of that information in the show description so that folks can access that. We'll put the website link for the foundation. Jeffrey Deskovic of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. Thank you so much for spending time. I've taken up way too much of your time, but you got a very compelling story, a great story of justice, a great story of using a horrible situation and turning it into something good. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Again, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be interviewed by you.